Have you ever lived in a house so small that every argument echoed like thunder through the walls, and secretly wondered if love could truly be big enough to keep a family from falling apart? In this video, I share my real journey of living and working in the United States, where the days I nearly gave up slowly became the turning point that changed our family forever. A small house in America. There is a quiet kind of pressure that follows you when you move to a new country, not loud, not dramatic, but always there, sitting gently on your shoulders while you try to pretend everything is fine. When I first arrived in the United States, I believed the hardest part would be my English. I was wrong. The hardest part was learning how to keep my hope alive inside a very small house that seemed to magnify every worry, every mistake, and every moment of doubt. Our house was small. Not the cute, minimalist kind you see on Instagram. I mean the kind where the kitchen, living room, and dining space all felt like they were having an awkward group hug. The walls were thin. The heater made strange noises at night. And somehow, every emotion inside that house sounded louder than it should have. At that time, I was working long hours, trying to adjust to American work culture while quietly battling my slow, careful English. In theory, my vocabulary was fine. In reality, my brain often froze at the exact moment I needed words the most. Neuroscience actually explains this very well. Under stress, the brain's amygdala, the emotional alarm system, becomes more active, which can temporarily reduce language fluency. In simple terms, the more pressure you feel, the harder it is to speak smoothly. And pressure was something I had in abundance. During my first few weeks working in the US, I spoke slowly. Very slowly. I would rehearse simple sentences in my head before meetings. Phrases like, "Let me check on that," or "I will follow up." Short. Safe. Manageable. Research in language acquisition shows that using simple, repeatable sentence patterns is one of the most effective ways to build speaking confidence. At the time, though, it didn't feel like a strategy. It felt like survival. Back in our small house, life was equally educational. My partner and I were both adjusting, new country, new systems, new bills that arrived with suspicious enthusiasm every month. Financial pressure is one of the top predictors of relationship conflict in immigrant families, according to multiple U.S. family studies. Looking back, I can see the pattern clearly. At the time, it just felt like we were both tired and slightly irritated all the time. Small house. Big emotions. Not the best combination. What surprised me most was how the physical space affected our mood. Environmental psychology has long shown that crowded living spaces can increase stress hormones like cortisol. Translation: the smaller the space, the less emotional breathing room people feel they have. So when work was stressful and communication was slow, our tiny house didn't just hold our furniture, it amplified our tension. But something important was also quietly happening. Every evening, after long workdays and slightly awkward grocery store conversations, I kept practicing my English in the simplest way possible. Not with complicated textbooks. Not with fancy grammar drills. I practiced by narrating my real life out loud in slow, clear sentences. I am cooking dinner. I feel tired today. Tomorrow will be better. It sounds almost too simple. But here is the science-backed truth. Language learning improves dramatically when it is emotionally connected to real experiences. The brain retains vocabulary more effectively when words are tied to personal meaning rather than abstract memorization. Without realizing it, I was building both my language skills and my emotional resilience at the same time. Of course, progress didn't feel heroic. Some days, I mixed up words at work and replayed the moment in my head for hours. Some nights, the silence in our small house felt heavier than any argument. And more than once, I quietly wondered if moving to America had been too ambitious for someone like me. If you are in the middle of your own slow, frustrating English journey right now, here is something important the internet doesn't say enough. Confidence rarely arrives first. Consistency does. In fact, studies on adult language learners in the United States show that learners who practice brief, daily speaking, even just 5 to 10 minutes of simple sentences, improve fluency significantly faster than those who study in long, irregular sessions. Small, steady effort rewires the brain more effectively than occasional bursts of motivation. That realization changed how I approached everything. Instead of trying to sound impressive, I focused on sounding clear. Instead of avoiding mistakes, I treated them like noisy but useful teachers. Instead of waiting to feel ready, I kept speaking anyway, slowly, carefully, imperfectly. Inside that small American house, something was quietly growing. Not just my English. Not just my work experience. Something deeper. Resilience. At the time, I didn't have a perfect system. I didn't have fluent conversations. And I definitely didn't have a peaceful, picture-perfect home life yet. What I had was much simpler, and much more powerful. I kept showing up. Day after day. Sentence after sentence. Because sometimes the beginning of a bigger love, for a country, for a family, for your own voice, doesn't start with confidence. It starts in a small house, where you decide not to quit. Big fights behind thin walls. Thin walls have a strange talent. They don't just let sound pass through, they amplify emotion. In our small American house, every sigh, every sharp word, every tired footstep seemed to bounce off the walls and come back louder. It didn't take long before the pressure of living and working in the United States started leaking into our conversations in ways neither of us expected. During the day, I was still navigating my new job, carefully choosing simple English sentences so I wouldn't freeze mid-conversation. By evening, my brain felt like an overheated laptop, functional, but barely. Cognitive science calls this decision fatigue. After hours of processing new language, new systems, and new social cues, the brain's ability to regulate emotions drops significantly. In plain English, when you're mentally exhausted, you are much more likely to snap over small things. And small things were everywhere. A misplaced bill on the kitchen counter. A forgotten grocery item. A short reply that sounded colder than intended. Inside a spacious home, these moments might have dissolved into background noise. Inside our small house, they became headline news. Family psychology research in the U.S. consistently shows that financial stress combined with space limitations increases the frequency of minor conflicts in couples adjusting to new environments. At the time, though, it didn't feel like research. It felt personal. One evening stands out clearly in my memory. It was late. I had just finished a long shift. My English at work that day had been acceptable, but not smooth. You know, the kind of day where every sentence feels like you're driving with the parking brake slightly on. When I walked into the house, I was already mentally depleted. The sink was full. The laundry basket was overflowing. And my partner, equally tired from work, asked a simple question in a slightly sharp tone. That was enough. The argument didn't start big. Most real arguments don't. Relationship researchers at the University of Washington have long noted that major conflicts often begin with what they call a harsh startup, a small moment of tension that escalates quickly when both people are already stressed. Within minutes, our small kitchen felt even smaller. Voices got louder. English and our native language started mixing in the air like emotional static. This is actually very common in bilingual households under stress. Studies show that when emotions run high, bilingual speakers often revert to whichever language feels more emotionally automatic. In our case, that meant some sentences came out in slow, careful English, and others came out much faster, much sharper. Not exactly a recipe for calm communication. Looking back now, the real issue wasn't the dishes or the laundry or the bills. The real issue was cognitive overload. Both of us were carrying the invisible weight of adaptation, new country, new work expectations, new financial responsibilities. When the human brain is overloaded for extended periods, the prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for patience and rational thinking, becomes less effective. Emotion starts driving the car. And emotion was definitely driving that night. What surprised me most afterward wasn't the argument itself. It was the silence that followed. In a small house, silence can feel strangely heavy, like the air itself is waiting for someone to say something first. That night, I sat at the small kitchen table and did something that would later become one of my most useful English learning habits. I replayed the argument, in simple English. Not to win. Not to blame. Just to understand. I felt tired. I wanted support. We were both stressed. This technique is quietly powerful. Language learning research shows that emotionally reflective self-talk helps strengthen both speaking fluency and emotional regulation. When you describe real feelings in simple sentences, your brain builds stronger neural connections than it does through abstract practice alone. At the time, I didn't know the neuroscience. I just knew I needed to slow things down, both my words and my reactions. Over the next few weeks, I began experimenting with something very small but very effective at home. Before responding during tense moments, I would pause and use one short English sentence in my head. Speak slowly. It sounds almost too basic. But cognitive behavioral studies show that brief mental cues can interrupt emotional escalation by re-engaging the brain's reasoning centers. In other words, one calm sentence can sometimes prevent 10 unnecessary ones. Progress was not immediate. There were still tense evenings. Still moments when the thin walls hurt more than they probably wanted to. But something subtle was shifting inside me. Instead of seeing every disagreement as proof that something was wrong with our life in America, I started seeing them as signals, information about stress, fatigue, and communication gaps. That shift matters more than people think. Because when you change the meaning of the conflict, you change your response to it. And inside that small house, the one that once made every problem feel louder, I was slowly, imperfectly learning a new skill that had nothing to do with perfect grammar. I was learning how to stay calm long enough for love to catch up with frustration. The fights weren't over. Not even close. But for the first time since arriving in the United States, I had the quiet feeling that maybe, just maybe, the story of this small house was still being written. Love in a new language. Romantic movies make love look fluent. Two people meet, music plays, and suddenly they understand each other perfectly. Real life in the United States was less cinematic. In our small house, love didn't arrive in smooth, poetic sentences. It arrived in slow English, mixed grammar, long pauses, and the occasional confused facial expression that said more than any dictionary ever could. By the time our early arguments started to calm down, a new challenge became obvious. It wasn't just about working hard or paying bills. It was about communication, the kind that goes deeper than daily logistics. Emotional communication. And when your English is still developing, expressing feelings can feel like trying to paint with only 3 colors. At work, I was getting better. My short, practical sentences were becoming more automatic. Research in second language acquisition shows that frequent exposure to predictable workplace phrases can significantly improve processing speed. That part made sense. Work conversations follow patterns. Love conversations do not. One evening, after another long day, my partner said something simple in English. You seem distant lately. Not dramatic. Not loud. But the sentence landed heavily. I understood every word individually. Together, though, they triggered a familiar freeze in my brain. This is actually a known phenomenon. Psycholinguistic studies show that emotional conversations require more cognitive processing in a second language than neutral ones. When feelings are involved, the brain must handle vocabulary, tone, and emotional interpretation all at once. That's a heavy load, especially after a full workday in a non-native environment. In that moment, my brain did what many language learners experience. It stalled. Not because I didn't care. Because I cared too much to say the wrong thing. So I did something that felt almost embarrassingly simple. I answered slowly, choosing the clearest words I had available. I am not distant. I am tired and adjusting. There was a pause. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of correcting my grammar or rushing the conversation, my partner nodded and said gently, "Okay. I understand." That moment changed more than I realized at the time. It revealed a powerful truth supported by communication research: clarity often matters more than complexity. Studies from interpersonal communication experts in the U.S. consistently show that simple, direct emotional statements are more effective in reducing conflict than long, complicated explanations, especially in cross-cultural relationships. In other words, my slow English wasn't the obstacle I thought it was. Over the following weeks, we began developing our own strange but effective communication rhythm. We naturally started using shorter sentences at home. Slower pacing. More pauses. More checking for understanding. Sometimes it sounded like this. I feel stressed today. Work was heavy. I need a little quiet time. These are not impressive sentences. No advanced vocabulary. No fancy idioms. But something important was happening beneath the surface. We were building emotional safety. Relationship psychology research shows that when couples feel understood, even through simple language, their stress response decreases significantly. The body literally calms down when communication feels safe. Heart rate drops. Cortisol lowers. The nervous system stops preparing for battle. Inside our small American house, the volume of our conversations was slowly decreasing. Not because life was suddenly easy. Because we were finally learning how to speak in ways the other person could actually receive. Of course, progress was not perfectly smooth. Some nights, my brain still searched desperately for the right word while the conversation kept moving. Some days, work drained my mental energy so much that even simple emotional sentences felt heavy. That's when I discovered one of the most practical English learning habits I still recommend today. I started preparing emotional vocabulary in advance. Nothing complicated. Just small, useful phrases I knew real life would require. I feel overwhelmed today. I need a little support. I appreciate what you did. Language acquisition research strongly supports this approach. Preparing high-frequency emotional phrases reduces cognitive load during real conversations. Instead of building sentences from scratch under pressure, your brain retrieves ready-made patterns. Faster. Smoother. Less stressful. Within a few months, something subtle but powerful shifted in our home. The fights didn't disappear completely. We were still two tired adults adjusting to American life, after all. But the recovery time after tension became shorter. The misunderstandings became less explosive. And the quiet moments between conversations started to feel warmer. Love, it turned out, doesn't require perfect grammar. It requires willingness. Willingness to slow down. Willingness to repeat. Willingness to say simple things sincerely. One night, as we were cleaning the kitchen together, still in our small, slightly cramped American home, my partner said something that stayed with me. You know, they smiled, your English is improving, but more importantly, your timing is better. Timing. Not vocabulary. Not accent. Timing. Because sometimes the strongest bridge between two people isn't built with big words. It's built with small, honest sentences, spoken at the right moment. And inside that small house, our bigger love was very quietly, and very imperfectly, beginning to grow. When dreams meet reality. The American dream looks very different at 6 a.m. in winter. It doesn't sparkle. It doesn't glow. It stands in the dark kitchen of a small house while the coffee machine hums too loudly and the to-do list already feels longer than your energy. That was the season when our dreams about living and working in the United States gently collided with reality, not in one dramatic crash, but in 1,000 small daily adjustments. When we first moved to America, everything felt symbolic. The airport. The first rental contract. The first job offer. It all carried the weight of possibility. But possibility is light. Responsibility is heavy. American work culture surprised me in ways I didn't expect. The pace was faster. The feedback was more direct. Deadlines were firm, not flexible suggestions. In many U.S. workplaces, efficiency and independence are highly valued. That meant fewer detailed instructions and more expectations to figure it out. For someone still thinking in 2 languages at once, that pressure multiplies. Cognitive research shows that bilingual individuals operating in a non-native language use more mental resources for routine tasks. Even when fluency is decent, the brain works harder to process information. Add performance pressure, and fatigue arrives quickly. By the time I returned home each evening, I wasn't just physically tired. I was neurologically drained. And drained people do not communicate beautifully. Our small house became the place where professional stress quietly transformed into personal tension. The bills were real. Healthcare insurance forms were confusing. Taxes were more complicated than we imagined. In the United States, financial systems can feel overwhelming for newcomers, especially when you are still translating legal vocabulary in your head. One night, sitting at our small kitchen table covered in paperwork, I remember staring at a stack of documents and thinking, this is not the glamorous dream I imagined. That thought scared me. Because when expectation and reality don't align, disappointment can quickly turn into resentment. Relationship researchers often point out that unspoken expectations are one of the biggest hidden sources of conflict in marriages. We weren't just arguing about chores or tone. We were arguing about invisible narratives, the version of America we thought we were moving into versus the version we were actually living. And here is the psychological twist. The brain naturally exaggerates disappointment when we feel we have sacrificed something important. We left familiarity, language comfort, extended family. So when daily life felt difficult, our brains quietly asked, was it worth it? During that period, our arguments weren't explosive every night. They were subtler. Shorter patience. Longer silences. Slightly sharper comments. I thought things would be easier by now. We are working so hard. When does it feel stable? Simple sentences. Heavy meaning. In those moments, my English practice unexpectedly became emotional training. Instead of allowing frustration to spiral into dramatic language, I intentionally chose calm, clear phrases. This is temporary. We are adjusting. We can learn this. Positive psychology research supports this kind of reframing. When people label challenges as temporary and controllable, stress levels decrease and problem-solving ability increases. Language shapes perception. Perception shapes emotion. So I practiced shaping my perception with words. At work, I began asking more questions instead of pretending to understand everything immediately. In American professional culture, asking for clarification is often seen as responsibility, not weakness. That realization reduced a huge amount of internal pressure. Could you clarify the deadline? Can you explain that process again? Short. Direct. Effective. At home, we made a quiet agreement. No major financial conversations after 9 p.m. Decision fatigue research shows that late-night discussions are significantly more likely to escalate negatively. The brain simply doesn't regulate emotion as well when tired. That small boundary reduced unnecessary conflicts dramatically. Slowly, reality became less frightening. Not because it changed. Because we changed how we approached it. There was one particular evening that felt like a turning point. We were sitting on the living room floor, because our furniture was still minimal, reviewing our monthly budget. Numbers were tight, but manageable. For the first time, instead of focusing on what we lacked, we listed what was working. Stable jobs. Growing English skills. Fewer intense arguments than before. A roof over our heads, even if it was small. Gratitude practices are not just trendy advice. Studies from positive psychology researchers show that couples who regularly acknowledge small wins experience higher relationship satisfaction, even during financially stressful periods. The brain shifts attention from threat to progress. That night, something subtle softened inside both of us. The dream had changed shape. It was no longer about instant success or rapid transformation. It was about sustainable growth. About learning the rules of a new country without losing each other in the process. The American dream, we realized, is not a destination you arrive at fully assembled. It is a daily negotiation between expectation and effort. And inside our small house, the one that once felt like proof of limitation, we began seeing it differently. Not as a symbol of struggle, but as evidence that we were still here. Still trying. Still choosing each other. When dreams meet reality, the collision can either break you or refine you. In our case, it was slowly, imperfectly, refining us. Silence, pride, and distance. Silence can be louder than shouting, especially inside a small house. After the early waves of big fights and practical stress began to settle, something more subtle moved in with us. It didn't slam doors. It didn't raise its voice. It simply sat between us at dinner, scrolled on its phone in the living room, and went to bed without saying much. Silence. Not peaceful silence. Not comfortable quiet. The kind built from pride, exhaustion, and unspoken expectations. Living and working in the United States had already stretched us in ways we didn't anticipate. New systems. New responsibilities. New identities. But what I didn't expect was how easily distance can grow when two people are both trying to be strong. Psychologists who study immigrant families often describe a pattern called protective withdrawal. When stress increases, partners sometimes hide their vulnerability to avoid burdening the other person. On the surface, it looks like maturity. Underneath, it slowly creates emotional distance. That was us. If I had a hard day at work, struggling through meetings in English, navigating cultural nuances, worrying about performance, I would come home and say, it was fine. One word. Closed door. If my partner felt overwhelmed by finances or adaptation stress, the answer was similar. It's okay. Short. Final. We thought we were protecting each other. In reality, we were building invisible walls inside our already small house. There's something interesting about language and pride. In a second language, vulnerability feels riskier. Research in psycholinguistics shows that people often feel emotionally safer expressing deep feelings in their native language. A second language can create emotional distance, which can be helpful in conflict, but harmful in intimacy. Sometimes, speaking English made it easier to discuss logistics. It made it harder to admit fear. One night, I noticed something uncomfortable. We weren't fighting loudly anymore, but we also weren't laughing much. The house felt calmer, yet colder. That realization hit harder than any argument. Relationship research from Dr. John Gottman's work in the United States emphasizes that emotional disengagement, not conflict, is often the strongest predictor of long-term dissatisfaction. In simple terms, arguing is not the biggest threat. Indifference is. I didn't want indifference. But pride is a quiet obstacle. It whispers things like, don't be dramatic, or you should handle this alone, or they are already stressed. So instead of speaking honestly, I practiced restraint. And distance grew. The turning point came on an ordinary Tuesday evening. Nothing dramatic happened. No shouting. No crisis. Just two tired adults eating dinner in silence while the television filled the background with noise. Halfway through the meal, I noticed my chest felt tight. Not angry. Not sad. Just disconnected. Neuroscience explains this too. When emotional needs go unmet for extended periods, the brain can shift into a mild stress response state. It doesn't explode. It withdraws. Energy lowers. Engagement drops. I realized something uncomfortable. I was slowly emotionally checking out, not because I didn't care, but because I didn't know how to reopen the conversation without creating another conflict. That night, instead of retreating to separate corners of the house, I tried something small. "I miss talking to you," I said. Simple sentence. 5 words. It felt strangely vulnerable. There was a pause. Not tense. Just surprised. "I thought you were just tired," my partner replied quietly. That exchange revealed the core misunderstanding. We weren't distant because we didn't love each other. We were distant because we were both trying to survive adaptation quietly. Research on emotional attunement shows that small bids for connection, short statements like "I miss you" or "Can we talk?" significantly increase relationship resilience. They reopen emotional channels without triggering defensiveness. After that conversation, we made a small rule. 10 minutes every night. No phones. No financial discussions. No problem solving. Just simple check-ins. How was today? What felt heavy? What felt good? At first, our answers were awkward. We were out of practice. Emotional muscles weaken without use. But gradually, the rhythm returned. I also noticed something fascinating about my English during these moments. When I spoke about feelings regularly, my emotional vocabulary expanded naturally. Words like overwhelmed, discouraged, grateful, uncertain started appearing more easily. Emotional repetition strengthens neural pathways, just like physical repetition strengthens muscles. Language and intimacy were growing together again. The house didn't get bigger. Our jobs didn't get magically easier. But the space between us became warmer. Pride slowly lost its grip. Silence transformed from avoidance into rest. And distance, that quiet, dangerous gap, began to shrink. What I learned during that season is something I now share often with anyone navigating marriage, migration, or learning English in the United States. Conflict doesn't break families as quickly as quiet disconnection does. And reconnection rarely requires dramatic speeches. Sometimes it only requires 5 honest words, spoken before silence becomes permanent. Learning through struggle. Growth rarely announces itself with fireworks. Most of the time, it shows up disguised as inconvenience, extra effort, awkward repetition, and the quiet discomfort of realizing you still have a lot to learn. That was exactly where I found myself in the middle of our life in the United States, tired, stretched thin, but slowly becoming more aware of one powerful truth. Struggle, when used correctly, is one of the best teachers. By this point, Our small house felt less like a pressure cooker and more like a training ground. Not comfortable yet, but no longer emotionally chaotic every week. The fights had softened. The silence had warmed. But something inside me knew there was still a deeper level of adjustment ahead, especially with my English. At work, I could function. I could complete tasks, join meetings, and handle basic conversations. But emotionally complex situations still made my brain hesitate. And hesitation, in American workplace culture, can sometimes be misunderstood as uncertainty or lack of confidence. So I decided to experiment with something intentional. Instead of separating my English learning from my real life, I merged them completely. Language researchers often call this contextual immersion. The idea is simple but powerful. The brain learns faster when language practice is directly connected to meaningful daily experiences. Vocabulary sticks better. Fluency develops more naturally. Emotional expression becomes more authentic. In other words, stop practicing English only in safe, artificial environments. Start using it where life is actually happening. My training ground became our everyday routine. While driving to work, I described my plans out loud in slow, clear English. Today I will finish the report. I will ask for clarification. I will stay calm in meetings. This might sound repetitive, and it was. But repetition with real-life relevance is exactly what strengthens neural language pathways. Studies in adult language acquisition show that spaced repetition combined with emotional context significantly improves long-term retention. Inside our small American house, I added another layer. Every evening, during our 10-minute check-in conversations, I intentionally practiced expressing feelings in simple English. Not to sound impressive. Not to force anything unnatural. Just to build comfort. I felt overwhelmed this morning. I was proud of one thing today. I still feel a little uncertain about work. Something surprising began to happen. The more I practiced emotional honesty in English, the less pressure I felt during real conversations. Cognitive load decreased. My brain no longer treated every sentence like a high-stakes performance. It started to feel normal. Neuroscience explains this shift clearly. Repeated exposure to emotionally meaningful language reduces activity in the brain's threat detection systems. In simple terms, your brain stops panicking every time you speak. But progress was not perfectly smooth. There were still moments when stress hit hard, especially at work. One afternoon, during a team discussion, I misunderstood an instruction. Not dramatically. Just enough to create confusion later. The old version of me would have gone quiet and replayed the mistake internally for hours. This time, I did something different. I used one simple sentence. Let me clarify to make sure I understand. That small phrase changed the entire interaction. In American professional culture, clarification is often interpreted as responsibility and engagement. Research on workplace communication in the U.S. consistently shows that employees who ask clear follow-up questions are perceived as more competent, not less. That moment boosted my confidence more than any grammar exercise ever had. Back at home, I shared the experience during our evening check-in. And something else shifted in our relationship dynamic. My partner began sharing more openly too, not just about stress, but about small daily wins. That's when I realized something important. Struggle had been isolating us earlier. Shared struggle was now connecting us. Family psychology research supports this pattern. Couples who openly discuss adaptation challenges, especially in immigrant contexts, show higher long-term relationship resilience than those who try to appear constantly strong. Strength, it turns out, is more sustainable when it is shared. We also introduced one small weekly habit that made a surprisingly big difference. Every Sunday afternoon, we spent 15 minutes reviewing the upcoming week, schedules, work pressures, financial reminders, using simple, clear language. No dramatic planning sessions. No overwhelming spreadsheets. Just calm preparation. Predictability reduces stress. The brain relaxes when it knows what is coming. Behavioral psychology research shows that even brief weekly planning can significantly lower anxiety levels in high adjustment environments like immigration and career transitions. Slowly, our small house began to feel different again. Still modest. Still occasionally chaotic. But no longer fragile. Looking back now, that season taught me one of the most valuable lessons about learning English, and about building a life in the United States at the same time. Fluency doesn't grow fastest when life is easy. It grows when you stay engaged during the uncomfortable middle. The middle where sentences are still imperfect. Where confidence is still under construction. Where love is still learning how to speak clearly under pressure. Inside that small house, through every awkward phrase and every honest conversation, something steady was forming. Not perfect English. Not perfect harmony. But something much more durable. Momentum. And momentum, once it starts, is very hard to stop. Raising kids between two worlds. Nothing stretches your identity faster than raising children in a country that still feels new to you. Our small house in the United States suddenly felt even smaller the day school forms arrived on the kitchen table. Registration packets. Health requirements. Emergency contact sections. Policies written in fast, formal English. I remember flipping through the pages and realizing this was no longer just about my career adaptation or our marriage communication. This was about our children's future. Parenting between two cultures is not simply about language. It's about values, expectations, and subtle social codes. In American schools, participation is encouraged. Students are expected to ask questions, express opinions, make eye contact. Independence is praised early. Back home, respect sometimes looked quieter. Listening more than speaking. Observing before contributing. Now we were navigating both systems at once. Developmental psychology research in the U.S. shows that children in bicultural families often develop strong cognitive flexibility, the ability to switch perspectives and adapt quickly. but that strength depends heavily on parental stability. If parents feel insecure or conflicted about cultural identity, children sense it. That realization added a new layer of responsibility. At parent-teacher conferences, my English mattered differently. It was no longer about professional performance. It was about understanding academic expectations, behavior feedback, long-term planning. The first conference felt intimidating. The teacher spoke quickly but kindly. I caught most of it, but not everything. There were subtle phrases like social adjustment and classroom engagement that required careful interpretation. Instead of pretending full understanding, I did something that once would have felt uncomfortable. Could you explain that in another way? I asked. Clear. Calm. Direct. Research in educational communication confirms that parents who actively seek clarification are more likely to stay engaged and advocate effectively for their children. In American culture, asking questions in academic settings is seen as involvement, not incompetence. That small moment changed my confidence dramatically. Parenting forced my English to grow in specific directions: vocabulary about emotions, behavior, learning styles. Words like encouragement, responsibility, boundaries, confidence. At home, we faced a different challenge. Our children naturally began blending languages. English from school. Our native language from us. Sometimes one sentence started in one language and ended in another. Linguists call this code switching. It's common in bilingual households and actually reflects cognitive strength, not confusion. Still, we worried. Would they lose connection to their roots? Would they feel different from classmates? Would we be able to guide them effectively in a system we were still learning ourselves? Family adaptation research suggests that open cultural discussion reduces identity confusion in children. So instead of avoiding the topic, we leaned into it. At dinner, we talked about differences. In America, students speak up more in class. In our home culture, we also value listening. Both can exist. Both can be strengths. This balanced framing matters. Children who see their dual identity as an advantage rather than a conflict show higher self-esteem and academic resilience. Inside our small house, cultural negotiation became normal conversation. There were also practical challenges. Homework instructions sometimes used idioms unfamiliar to me. School newsletters included references to holidays and traditions we hadn't experienced before. Policies about attendance, volunteering, standardized testing, all required careful reading. Instead of feeling overwhelmed, we applied the same system that had helped our marriage. Slow down. Ask questions. Break it into small steps. Cognitive load theory explains why this works. When information feels overwhelming, breaking it into manageable parts reduces mental strain and improves retention. We stopped trying to master everything at once. One form at a time. One policy at a time. And something beautiful began happening. Our children became bridges. They explained school slang to us. We explained family traditions to them. The house filled with hybrid language and shared learning. One evening, while helping with homework, my child corrected my pronunciation gently, and we both laughed. Instead of feeling embarrassed, I felt proud. Growth was no longer one-directional. We were learning together. Parenting in the United States also revealed something deeper about our relationship. When we aligned on core values, kindness, responsibility, respect, cultural differences felt less threatening. Values anchor families when environments change. Marriage and family researchers often emphasize that shared long-term vision stabilizes couples during adaptation stress. Raising children forced us to clarify that vision. What kind of family did we want to be? Not just in America. Anywhere. Inside our modest home, surrounded by school papers and lunchboxes and bilingual conversations, the answer became clearer. We wanted to be a family that adapts without losing warmth. A family that asks questions without shame. A family that sees struggle as training, not failure. Our house was still small. Work was still demanding. Bills still arrived regularly. But watching our children confidently navigate two worlds reminded us why we came in the first place. The American chapter of our story was no longer just about survival. It was about building stability for the next generation. And in that process, our bigger love found a new purpose, not just keeping us together, but guiding those growing within our thin walls. The night everything changed. Some turning points arrived quietly. No dramatic music. No slammed doors. Just an ordinary night when the air feels slightly heavier than usual, and something inside you decides it's time to stop surviving and start choosing differently. That night began like many others in our small house in the United States. The kids were asleep. The dishwasher hummed softly. Work emails were temporarily ignored. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table that had seen arguments, paperwork, budgeting sessions, and small victories. But this time felt different. For weeks, I had sensed a subtle tension returning. Not explosive fights. Not cold silence. Just a lingering question under the surface: are we just managing life, or are we building it together? Psychologists describe something called relationship drift. It happens when couples become efficient partners, managing tasks, raising children, paying bills, but slowly disconnect emotionally. Drift is dangerous because it doesn't feel urgent. It feels functional. That realization unsettled me more than our earlier arguments ever did. So I said something that had been forming quietly in my mind for days. I don't want us to just manage this life. I want us to grow in it. The sentence was simple. Clear. No dramatic language. But it carried weight. There was a long pause. Not uncomfortable. Just thoughtful. My partner looked at me and responded, "I've been feeling the same." In that moment, something shifted. Research in marriage psychology consistently shows that vulnerability, especially when expressed without blame, increases emotional intimacy dramatically. When one person speaks honestly about fear or desire without accusation, it often invites openness instead of defensiveness. That night, we didn't argue. We reflected. We talked about our early months in America, the stress, the adaptation, the financial fear. We acknowledged how far we had come. Stable jobs. Better communication. Children adjusting well to school. And then we asked a deeper question. What do we actually want our family to feel like 5 years from now? Not what do we want to own. Not what position do we want at work. But how do we want our home to feel? That question changed the tone entirely. Future-oriented conversations activate a different part of the brain than problem-focused ones. Neuroscience shows that imagining positive future scenarios increases motivation and cooperative behavior. Instead of defending past mistakes, both partners begin building something shared. We started describing small images. I want our house to feel calm. I want our kids to remember laughter. I want us to feel like a team. The word team stayed in the air for a moment. That's when we realized something important. We had been adapting individually. Now it was time to adapt strategically, together. We pulled out a notebook. Nothing fancy. Just plain paper. And we wrote 3 simple commitments. First, weekly check-in stays non-negotiable. Second, financial planning happens early, not late at night. Third, if one person feels overwhelmed, we say it clearly within 24 hours. Clear systems reduce ambiguity. Behavioral research consistently shows that couples who create explicit agreements experience lower long-term conflict because expectations are defined, not assumed. But the most important moment came near the end of that conversation. I'm proud of us, my partner said quietly. That sentence landed deeper than I expected. Pride, when expressed positively, reinforces shared identity. Social psychology research explains that couples who regularly affirm collective progress develop stronger resilience during future stress. For the first time since moving to the United States, I felt something steady inside. Not excitement. Not relief. Stability. That night wasn't dramatic. No tears. No grand gestures. Just 2 adults sitting in a small American kitchen choosing intention over drift. And intention is powerful. We also talked honestly about language. About how learning English had affected both of us, not just practically, but emotionally. I admitted that sometimes I still felt insecure in fast conversations. Instead of minimizing it, my partner responded with encouragement. You've grown more than you think. Growth is often invisible from the inside. That conversation did not magically erase future stress. Work remained demanding. Parenting remained complex. Cultural navigation remained ongoing. But something fundamental changed. We were no longer reacting to life in America. We were designing our approach to it. The next morning felt subtly lighter. The house looked the same. The walls were still thin. The mortgage still real. but the emotional structure inside had strengthened. Family researchers often emphasize that resilience is not the absence of conflict. It is the presence of shared meaning. That night, we created shared meaning. Our small house was no longer just a place we happened to live while adjusting to American life. It became a space we intentionally shaped. And that quiet kitchen conversation, the one without raised voices or dramatic ultimatums, marked the moment everything truly began to change. Because sometimes the biggest shift in a family doesn't happen during a fight. It happens when two people calmly decide they want something better, and choose to build it together. Small habits, bigger love. Grand transformations are attractive. They look powerful in movies and inspiring in social media captions. But inside a small house in the United States, I learned something far less dramatic and far more effective. Love grows through small, repeated habits. After the night everything changed, that quiet kitchen conversation where we chose intention over drift, we didn't wake up as a completely different couple. We woke up as the same two people, with the same jobs, the same responsibilities, the same thin walls. The difference was subtle. We started protecting small habits like they were valuable investments. Behavioral psychology calls this the compound effect. Tiny, consistent actions accumulate over time and produce disproportionate long-term results. In relationships, these micro-actions shape emotional climate more than occasional grand gestures ever could. Our first habit was simple, morning tone. Before leaving for work, regardless of stress level, we exchanged one clear sentence of support. Have a steady day. I'm with you. Text me if it's heavy. Short phrases. No poetry. But tone matters. Neuroscience research shows that early positive interaction in the day influences mood regulation and stress response for hours afterward. The brain remembers emotional beginnings. That 1-minute ritual softened entire days. Our second habit was appreciation in real time. Not waiting until anniversaries. Not saving gratitude for big milestones. Just noticing small things immediately. Thank you for handling that call. I saw how patient you were. I appreciate you staying calm. Positive reinforcement strengthens behavior. This is not just relationship advice, it's supported by behavioral science. When positive actions are acknowledged quickly, the brain associates them with reward. They're more likely to be repeated. Slowly, appreciation replaced assumption. We also refined our English through these habits. Emotional vocabulary expanded naturally because repetition embedded it into daily life. Words like grateful, proud, supportive, present stopped feeling formal. They became normal. Fluency grew quietly inside affection. One habit that made a surprisingly big difference was what we called reset moments. If tension started rising, tone sharpening, patience thinning, either of us could say one neutral sentence. Let's reset. No blame. No explanation. Just reset. Conflict resolution research in American marriage studies highlights the importance of repair attempts, small signals that interrupt escalation before it becomes damaging. Couples who successfully use repair attempts during tension are significantly more likely to maintain long-term stability. At first, saying "let's reset" felt slightly awkward. Later, it felt powerful. Because it meant we valued peace more than winning. Work stress didn't disappear. Parenting challenges didn't simplify. But the atmosphere inside our home shifted from reactive to intentional. Another small habit emerged on weekends. Sunday evening reflection. Not a heavy planning session. Just 3 questions. What went well this week? What felt hard? What do we adjust next week? This pattern aligns closely with cognitive behavioral strategies used for emotional regulation. Reflection increases awareness. Awareness reduces impulsive reaction. Adjustment becomes proactive rather than reactive. In our small American house, Sunday reflection prevented Monday explosions. There was also something deeply practical we added: financial transparency. Instead of letting money conversations build silent anxiety, we scheduled them. Structured. Calm. Predictable. Financial stress is one of the most cited contributors to marital conflict in the United States. But structured communication reduces uncertainty, and uncertainty is often what fuels anxiety. Predictability built safety. And safety built patience. Over time, something almost invisible began strengthening between us. Trust in process. We stopped expecting perfection from each other. We started expecting effort. Effort is sustainable. Perfection is exhausting. There were still occasional disagreements. Of course there were. We were 2 adults balancing careers, raising children between cultures, adapting continuously to American systems. But disagreements no longer felt like threats to the entire foundation. They felt like maintenance. Like adjusting a window that sticks. Not rebuilding the house. I also noticed something fascinating about myself during this period. The more emotionally stable our home became, the more confident I felt professionally. Emotional security reduces cognitive distraction. Research in occupational psychology confirms that stable home environments improve focus and performance at work. Love and career were not competing forces. They were reinforcing systems. One night, after putting the kids to bed, we sat quietly on the couch, not discussing budgets or schedules, just existing. The house felt calm. Not because life was easy, but because we had learned how to regulate it. I think we're stronger now, my partner said softly. Not richer. Not more successful. Stronger. And strength, I realized, was never about the size of the house. It was about the habits inside it. Small sentences. Small acknowledgements. Small resets. Small reflections. Over time, those small habits built something unexpectedly large. Bigger love. Not dramatic. Not loud. But steady enough to hold everything else together. What really keeps a family together? For a long time, I believed stability came from big things. A bigger house. a higher salary. Perfect English. Perfect timing. Perfect plans. Living and working in the United States slowly, and sometimes painfully, corrected that belief. Because inside our small house, with its thin walls and very ordinary furniture, our family did not become stronger when life became easier. We became stronger when our responses became wiser. By this stage of our journey, the daily chaos had softened into rhythm. Work was still demanding. Parenting still required patience. Bills still arrived with impressive consistency. But emotionally, something important had stabilized. We were no longer constantly bracing for the next problem. We were managing reality with more clarity. And clarity changes everything. Family researchers in the United States often emphasize that long-term relationship stability depends less on external conditions and more on what they call adaptive functioning, the ability of a couple to adjust behavior in response to stress. In simple terms, strong families are not problem-free families. They are flexible families. Looking back at our early months in America, flexibility was exactly what we lacked. We were rigid in expectations. Quick to interpret stress personally. Slow to communicate vulnerability. Every difficulty felt like evidence that something was wrong. Now the same challenges appeared, but felt different. Because we had changed how we processed them. One evening, while reviewing school updates and work schedules at our familiar kitchen table, I noticed how naturally we were coordinating. Short sentences. Clear tone. No unnecessary tension. That meeting might run late, I said. Okay, I'll handle pickup, my partner replied. Simple. Efficient. Calm. Moments like that don't look dramatic. But they represent something powerful, cooperative alignment. Social psychology research shows that couples who maintain cooperative language patterns during routine logistics experience significantly lower long-term conflict levels. In the early days, small disruptions triggered emotional reactions. Now they triggered problem-solving. That shift is the quiet backbone of family resilience. I also began noticing something else, something deeply connected to our journey learning English in America. The more emotionally secure our home became, the less pressure I felt to perform perfectly in conversations outside the house. Confidence was no longer something I tried to force. It was something that emerged. Cognitive science explains this well. When the nervous system feels safe in primary environments, like home, cognitive resources free up for higher-level tasks, including language processing, decision-making, and social interaction. In plain terms, emotional safety makes your brain smarter. Inside our small house, we had built safety through repetition. Weekly check-ins. Morning tone. Real-time appreciation. Sunday reflection. Clear financial talks. Reset moments during tension. None of these habits were impressive individually. Together, they were transformative. There was one conversation that crystallized everything for me. It happened on an ordinary weekend afternoon while we were folding laundry, not exactly a cinematic setting. I think earlier we were trying to survive America, my partner said thoughtfully. And now? I asked. Now we're learning how to live here. That distinction hit deeply. Survival mode is reactive. The nervous system stays on alert. Patience shortens. Communication tightens. Every problem feels urgent. Living mode is different. The nervous system regulates. Attention expands. Small joys become visible again. Problems still exist, but they stop defining the entire emotional landscape. Immigration adaptation studies consistently describe this transition. Many families spend the first phase in high alert adjustment. Those who successfully move into integration mode show significantly higher long-term satisfaction and stability. In our case, the turning point wasn't one dramatic event. It was accumulated awareness. We learned that arguments are not always threats. Silence is not always peace. Stress is not always failure. And perhaps most importantly, a small house is not a small life. The American dream, at least in our story, stopped being about external upgrades. It became about internal calibration, adjusting expectations, communication, and emotional habits until the system worked sustainably. There were still imperfect days. Of course there were. Some mornings still felt rushed. Some weeks still stretched our patience. But the foundation no longer felt fragile. It felt practiced. And practice creates durability. As I reflected on everything we had moved through, the early fights, the cultural confusion, the language hesitation, the parenting adjustments, one answer kept surfacing clearly. What keeps a family together is rarely one big decision. It is thousands of small, repeated choices. Choosing to clarify instead of assume. Choosing to appreciate instead of overlook. Choosing to reset instead of escalate. Choosing to speak, even slowly, even imperfectly, instead of withdrawing. Inside our modest American home, bigger love did not arrive dramatically. It accumulated quietly. Sentence by sentence. Habit by habit. Day by day. And once that kind of love takes root, it becomes surprisingly difficult to shake. Bigger love in a small house. The house is still small. The walls are still thin. The heater still makes that strange sound in winter. And yet, everything feels different. When I look around now, at the kitchen table where we once argued about bills, at the living room floor where we planned our future, at the hallway filled with children's backpacks and mismatched shoes, I don't see limitation anymore. I see evidence. Evidence that a family can stretch without breaking. Evidence that love can grow without needing more square footage. Evidence that living and working in the United States was never just about building a career, it was about building resilience. If someone had told me in the beginning that our biggest growth would happen inside the smallest spaces, I probably wouldn't have believed them. Back then, I thought success meant expansion. Bigger income. Bigger house. Bigger comfort. Now I understand something more subtle. Security is not created by size. It is created by stability. Over the years in America, we learned systems. We learned policies. We learned how to navigate healthcare, taxes, school structures, workplace expectations. My English improved steadily, not because I chased perfection, but because I used it daily, imperfectly, honestly. Language stopped being a performance. It became connection. That shift matters deeply. Research in applied linguistics shows that long-term language retention depends more on emotional engagement than on technical precision. When language is tied to real relationships and real responsibilities, it becomes part of identity, not just skill. Inside our home, English became the bridge between stress and solution, between misunderstanding and clarity, between pride and vulnerability. But the deeper transformation wasn't linguistic. It was relational. We stopped measuring our life against external comparisons. Social media highlights, colleagues' promotions, friends' larger homes. Comparison fuels dissatisfaction, and dissatisfaction quietly erodes gratitude. Positive psychology research consistently confirms that chronic comparison lowers long-term happiness, regardless of actual achievement. So we made a quiet decision. We would measure progress internally. Are we calmer than last year? Are we clearer in communication? Are we more patient with our children? Are we more honest with each other? Those questions became our real metrics. And the answers, over time, were yes. There was a moment recently, nothing dramatic, just an ordinary evening, when I noticed how naturally our family moved together. Homework at the table. Dinner preparation without tension. A small disagreement handled quickly with a calm "let's reset." Laughter returning easily. The house felt alive. Not chaotic. Not fragile. Alive. Family systems theory explains that stable families develop predictable emotional patterns. Safety becomes habitual. Conflict becomes manageable. Repair becomes faster than rupture. That's what we built. Not a perfect home. A responsive one. The American dream in our story did not arrive with fireworks. It arrived quietly through repetition, through daily effort, slow English conversations, intentional habits, and the willingness to grow through discomfort. The early fights now feel like training sessions. The silent seasons feel like lessons in awareness. The financial stress feels like discipline practice. Even the language mistakes feel valuable, reminders that growth is always slightly awkward. People sometimes assume that once adaptation is complete, everything becomes easy. That's not true. Life in the United States continues to evolve. Work expectations shift. Children grow. New challenges appear. But our foundation is different now. We no longer fear tension the way we once did. We no longer interpret difficulty as failure. We no longer confuse small space with small possibility. And perhaps most importantly, we understand what truly keeps a family together. It isn't the absence of conflict. It isn't flawless communication. It isn't financial perfection. It is commitment expressed consistently. It is choosing patience when pride would be easier. It is speaking honestly when silence feels safer. It is appreciating small efforts before resentment grows. It is remembering that love, like language, improves with practice. Our small house did not shrink our dreams. It refined them. It forced us to focus on essentials. Clarity over ego. Cooperation over competition. Connection over comfort. If you are in your own small space right now, emotionally, financially, linguistically, this is what I want you to remember. Growth rarely begins in abundance. It begins in limitation. And limitation, when approached with intention, becomes training. Today, when I close the front door after a long day of work in America, I don't walk into a symbol of struggle. I walk into proof. Proof that bigger love does not require bigger rooms. It requires bigger commitment. And that commitment, practiced daily inside thin walls, can hold more than you ever imagined. What if the strongest families in America aren't the ones with the biggest houses, but the ones who refuse to stop choosing each other on the hardest days? Our story inside this small home is only one chapter of a much bigger journey of real life in the United States, learning English through story, and building love that actually lasts. If this story spoke to you, even a little, stay with this channel. Because the next story might be the one that changes how you see your own journey. Subscribe now for more real English story practice, slow and clear listening, and true stories about life, love, and family in the USA. Like and share to support the channel and help more learners grow with confidence. Your next breakthrough might start with the next video.